Forget everything you think you know about bartending, because in Galveston, Texas, the night shift is a whole different beast. They told me the job was simple: pour drinks, keep the peace, close up by dawn. But they didn't mention the rules, the ones written to keep you safe from what lingers after last call. I've seen things behind that bar no one should ever witness. Shadows that move on their own. Voices that whisper your name when the room is empty. And if you think that sounds crazy, wait until you hear what happens when the rules are broken. This isn't just a job. It's survival. In a place where the living aren't always the ones ordering the drinks. The neon signs along the Strand District flicker to life as dusk settles over Galveston Island, casting long shadows across the historic cobblestone streets. Most people see this place as a charming seaside town, a weekend getaway filled with Victorian architecture and Gulf Coast breezes. They come here for the beaches, the history, the seafood restaurants that line the seawall. They have no idea what happens after midnight, when the tourists retreat to their hotels, and the real Galveston emerges from the darkness like something dragging itself out of the ocean. My name is Jordan, and for the past 3 years, I've worked the night shift at the Drowned Anchor, a bar tucked away on a side street most visitors never find. The building itself dates back to 1885, surviving the great storm that killed thousands and reshaped this island forever. The original owner, a ship captain named Thaddeus Crane, supposedly went down with his vessel during a catastrophic hurricane, but locals whisper that he never really left. The bar has changed hands dozens of times since then, but the rules have remained constant, passed down from one bartender to the next like cursed heirlooms nobody wants but everyone's too afraid to abandon. When I first applied for the position, the interview was unlike anything I'd experienced. The owner, an elderly woman named Vera with eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you, didn't ask about my experience or references. Instead, she slid a weathered leather journal across the table between us, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. Inside were the rules, written in different hands spanning decades, maybe even a century. Some entries were neat and careful. Others scrawled frantically, as if the writer couldn't get the words down fast enough. "Can you follow instructions?" Vera asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen things they couldn't unsee, even when they don't make sense, even when every logical bone in your body screams that they're ridiculous. I needed the job. Rent in Galveston isn't cheap, even for a studio apartment 3 blocks from the beach, and my previous restaurant had closed after the owners retired. I nodded, thinking these were probably just quirky house rules about handling drunk customers or closing procedures. I had no idea what I was actually agreeing to. "Then the job is yours," Vera said, closing the journal with a soft thud that sounded far too final. "But understand this, Jordan. These rules aren't suggestions. They're not outdated policies we keep around for tradition. They're boundaries between you and things you don't want to meet. Break them, and you'll wish you'd just quit instead." I should have walked out right then. The way she said it, the absolute certainty in her voice, should have sent me running back to the safety of daylight employment. But something about the Drowned Anchor called to me. Even then, maybe it was the way the building seemed to lean slightly toward the Gulf, as if listening to the waves. Maybe it was the strange sense of belonging I felt stepping through its doors, like I was meant to be there despite every rational part of my brain warning me otherwise. Galveston has always been a city of contradictions and secrets. As a port town, it saw countless sailors, smugglers, pirates, and desperate souls wash up on its shores throughout history. Bodies were pulled from the Gulf after every storm, some identified, most forgotten. The island sits on a thin strip of sand between the mainland and the vast, dark waters of the Gulf of Mexico, a threshold between solid ground and the unknown depths. That's what Galveston really is. When you look past the tourist attractions and historical markers, it's a place caught between worlds, where the veil separating the ordinary from the extraordinary wears dangerously thin. My first night, I arrived at the Drowned Anchor an hour before my shift started, wanting to familiarize myself with the layout. The bar occupied a narrow building squeezed between a closed antique shop and an alley that always seemed darker than it should be. Inside, the space felt larger than the exterior suggested, stretching back into shadows that the overhead lights couldn't quite penetrate. The bar itself was solid oak, scarred and stained by generations of drinks, carved with initials and symbols I didn't recognize. Behind it, shelves of liquor bottles caught the dim light, and there, on the back wall, hung the antique mirror Vera had warned me about. It was massive, easily 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, framed in tarnished silver that might have been beautiful once. The glass itself was old, genuine mercury glass from an era when mirrors were made differently, more dangerous, somehow more real. Even in the early evening light, I could see there was something wrong with it. Reflections in that mirror didn't quite match reality. They lagged, just a fraction of a second, like watching yourself through a poor internet connection. I caught my own reflection staring back at me. But for just a moment, I could have sworn my reflected self was looking at something behind me that wasn't there. "Don't stare at it too long," a voice said from the corner, making me jump. An older man sat at a table I could have sworn was empty moments before, nursing a whiskey that looked untouched despite the lowered level in the glass. "Gets in your head if you let it." This was Thomas. I would learn, one of the regulars who appeared every night exactly at 9:30 and always ordered the same drink. He never paid, and Vera had explicitly told me not to ask him to. He was part of the bar, she'd explained, as much as the walls or the floor or that damn mirror. Some things just were, and questioning them too deeply led nowhere good. The rules themselves seemed nonsensical at first glance. Never clean the mirror after midnight. The first one stated in bold letters at the top of the journal. Below it, written in a different hand, an annotation explained that a bartender named Raymond had ignored this rule in 1967, insisting that cleanliness was essential. They found him 3 days later in the alley beside the bar, catatonic, staring at nothing, whispering about faces in the glass that wanted out. He never spoke coherently again. Always leave an empty glass of water on table 3, another rule insisted, even when the table remains unoccupied. The notation beside this one was briefer, chilling in its simplicity. For the thirsty one, respect must be paid. Never serve the last drink from any bottle of rum after 2 in the morning. If you must open a new bottle, the old one is to be poured into the sink immediately, while speaking the words safe passage and fair winds. The reasoning here was less documented, but the implications were clear enough. Galveston's history was soaked in rum, smuggling, and pirates who met violent ends. Something about that final drink, that last measure of liquor, carried weight better left unsettled. What struck me most about these rules wasn't their strangeness, but the fear embedded in the handwriting of those who'd recorded them. This wasn't superstition passed down as folklore. These were warnings written by people who'd learned the hard way, desperate messages thrown forward through time to protect whoever came next. Each entry in that journal represented someone's encounter with something beyond normal experience, distilled into simple instructions meant to keep you safe. As my first night truly began and the clock struck 10, the bar's atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavier, charged with anticipation. The floorboards creaked in patterns that didn't match anyone's footsteps. That mirror behind the bar reflected shadows that moved independently of their sources. And I understood, finally, what Vera had been trying to tell me. The Drowned Anchor wasn't just a bar. It was a boundary, a checkpoint, a place where things from elsewhere came to drink, remember, or pass through. And I was the one standing between them in chaos. The first customer of the night pushed through the door exactly at 10:15, shaking rain from a coat despite the clear skies outside. He approached the bar with eyes that reflected the light strangely, too bright, too aware. "Whiskey," he said, his voice carrying an accent I couldn't quite place. Neat. And tell me, bartender, do you know why you're really here? I poured the drink with steady hands, remembering another rule from the journal. Never answer existential questions from customers who arrive wet, but unwetted by the weather outside. Simply serve them and remain silent. This was going to be a long night, but something inside me thrilled at the challenge, at the mystery of it all. I was exactly where I was meant to be, standing at the crossroads between the mundane world and whatever lurked beneath Galveston's charming facade. The real question was whether I'd survive long enough to understand why. The leather journal sat beneath the bar counter, within easy reach, but hidden from customer view. I found myself consulting it constantly during those first few weeks, my fingers tracing the words written by bartenders whose names I'd never know. Each rule was a breadcrumb trail left by someone who'd stumbled through the darkness before me, and I was grateful for every single one, no matter how bizarre they seemed. Rule number 7 stated, if a woman in a blue dress asks for a drink called the captain's farewell, you must use the bottle of rum kept in the locked cabinet beneath the register. Do not ask questions. Do not make conversation. Pour exactly 3 fingers, add nothing else, and step back from the bar until she finishes. I'd memorized this rule along with the others, but I didn't truly understand it until she walked in on my 4th night. The bar was moderately busy, filled with a mix of locals and the strange regulars who seemed to exist in the spaces between normal reality. I was mixing a gin and tonic for a college kid who'd wandered in looking for adventure when the temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. She stood in the doorway, her blue dress the color of deep water, the fabric moving despite the absence of any breeze. Her hair was dark and wet, plastered to her pale face, and her eyes held the emptiness of someone who'd been staring at the horizon for far too long. Water dripped from her clothes, forming puddles on the wooden floor, and the smell of salt and decay filled the air around her. The captain's farewell, she said, her voice like waves dragging across sand. Please. My hands shook as I retrieved the key from its hiding place and unlocked the cabinet. The bottle inside was old, predating any liquor I'd ever seen, with a handwritten label that read simply for her. I poured exactly 3 fingers into a glass, my heart hammering against my ribs, and placed it on the bar before stepping back as instructed. She approached slowly, leaving wet footprints that steamed slightly in the cold air. Her fingers, wrinkled and pale as if she'd been submerged for hours, closed around the glass. She drank it in one long swallow, and for just a moment, her face transformed. The emptiness in her eyes filled with something like peace, or perhaps acceptance. Then she set down the glass, turned, and walked back toward the door. Wait, I called out, forgetting the rule about not asking questions. Who are you? She paused at the threshold, her back to me. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of a century of grief. I'm still waiting for him to come home from the storm. I'll always be waiting. Then she was gone, and the temperature returned to normal. The puddles on the floor evaporated as if they'd never existed. The glass she'd used sat on the bar, bone dry, with 3 grains of sand settled at the bottom. Thomas appeared at his usual table moments later, materializing from the shadows with his perpetual whiskey. You did well, he said quietly. She's been coming here since the bar opened. She drowned in 1900, along with 6,000 others. Her husband was the captain this place is named for, Thaddeus Crane. The rules suddenly made terrible, perfect sense. They weren't arbitrary. They were rituals of respect, acknowledgments of the dead who couldn't or wouldn't move on, small acts of compassion for souls trapped between what was and what should have been. Rule number 12 was equally specific. Between the hours of 1 and 3 in the morning, you may hear knocking from inside the walls. Do not acknowledge it. Do not investigate. Continue working as if you hear nothing. The knocking will stop on its own. I experienced this phenomenon on my 6th night. The bar was quiet, just two customers nursing beers at opposite ends of the room when the knocking began. It started soft, almost tentative, like someone tapping gently to get attention. Then it grew louder, more insistent, moving along the wall behind the liquor shelves. The rhythm was deliberate, desperate, the sound of someone trapped and trying to communicate. One of the customers looked up, his face pale. "Do you hear that?" I forced myself to continue wiping down the bar, my movements steady despite the fear crawling up my spine. "Hear what?" I replied, following the rules guidance. The knocking intensified, racing around the room now, circling us like a predator. Pictures rattled on the walls. Bottles clinked together on the shelves. The customer who'd spoken stood up, backing toward the door. "There's something in the walls. There's something trying to get out." "Old building," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "Pipes settling. Happens all the time." He left quickly, throwing money on the bar without waiting for change. The other customer, an elderly woman I'd never seen before, simply smiled into her beer and said nothing. The knocking continued for another 20 minutes, growing frantic, almost angry, before finally fading to silence. When I checked the journal later, I found a note scrawled in the margin beside this rule. "They're not trying to get out. They're trying to get us to let them out. Don't listen. They're in there for a reason." Rule number 18 haunted me more than the others. Always leave an empty glass of water on table 3, even when the table remains unoccupied. If the glass is ever found empty, refill it immediately and leave an offering of bread beside it. Do not look directly at table 3 while doing this. Table 3 sat in the corner farthest from the bar, positioned where the shadows gathered thickest. The wood was darker than the other tables, stained with something that might have been water damage, but looked disturbingly like the outline of a body. Every night, before the bar opened, I placed that glass of water exactly in the center of the table, and every night I wondered who or what I was leaving it for. The answer came during a thunderstorm in my second month. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the bar in strobing bursts of white light, and in one of those flashes, I saw someone sitting at table 3. The figure was hunched over the glass, drinking deeply, and in the brief moment of visibility, I caught sight of cracked, dried lips, skin stretched tight over skull, hands that were little more than bone wrapped in parchment. When the lightning flashed again, the table was empty. The glass was dry, not a drop of water remaining. My legs felt weak as I approached with a water pitcher and a slice of bread from the kitchen. Keeping my eyes fixed on the floor as instructed, I refilled the glass, placed the bread beside it, and backed away without looking up. Behind me, I heard the faint sound of someone drinking, the desperate gulping of the truly thirsty, followed by the soft tearing of bread being consumed. "Thank you," a voice whispered from the corner, raw and broken. The thirst is worse than the dying was. Always the thirst. These rules weren't written to scare future bartenders. They were written with compassion, with understanding that the dead of Galveston carried their deaths with them. Those who drowned were forever thirsty. Those trapped in collapsed buildings still knocked, trying to alert rescuers who would never come. Those waiting for lost loves continued their vigil, unable to accept that the storm had taken everything. Rule number 23 was simpler, but no less important. Never serve the last drink from any bottle of rum after 2 in the morning. If you must open a new bottle, the old one is to be poured into the sink immediately, while speaking the words safe passage and fair winds. I learned the significance of this rule from Vera herself, who stopped by one night to check on me. She arrived just before 2, her eyes scanning the bar with a practiced assessment of someone who had worked these same floors for decades. "The last drink from a bottle of rum belongs to the sea," she explained, settling onto a bar stool. "Galveston was built on piracy, smuggling, and the blood of men who died for rum and gold. After 2 in the morning, when the veil is thinnest, that last drink becomes something more than liquor. It becomes a key, A door, a way for things that should stay drowned to reach through and pull someone back with them. She told me about a bartender named Mitchell who'd ignored this rule in 1983, insisting it was wasteful superstition. He served a customer the last pour from a bottle of dark rum at 2:15 in the morning. The customer drank it down, thanked Mitchell, and walked out the door. Mitchell was found the next morning washed up on the beach, drowned despite never having left the bar. The security cameras showed him serving that drink, then suddenly convulsing at the bar, his body moving as if being dragged underwater by invisible hands, water pouring from his mouth and nose until he stopped moving entirely. "The rules protect you," Vera said, her hand covering mine with surprising warmth. "But more than that, they protect the balance. This bar exists at crossroads. The living come here to drink and forget. The dead come here to remember and be remembered. Your job is to serve both with equal respect and equal caution." I looked around the drowned anchor with new understanding. Every scarred table, every stained floorboard, every shadow that moved wrong, they all told stories of a city that had died and been reborn, whose dead had never truly left. The rules weren't just guidelines for survival. They were a contract, an agreement between the living and the dead, maintained by whoever stood behind that bar and chose to honor it. As Vera left, she paused at the door. "You're doing well, Jordan. Better than most. Just remember that every person who walks through that door is carrying something. Your job is to serve them a drink, not to solve their problems. Some souls are meant to wander. Some griefs are meant to last forever. All we can do is offer them a moment of peace in the crossing." The clock struck 2:30, and I found myself pouring the last inch of rum from a nearly empty bottle into the sink, whispering the words that have been spoken by bartenders for over a century. Safe passage and fair winds. The rum swirled down the drain, and for just a moment, I heard the distant sound of waves crashing, of wind and sails, of men singing old sea shanties into the dark. Then it was gone, and the bar was quiet again, filled only with the living and the dead who'd learned to coexist in the shadows of Galveston's endless night. Not every bartender who worked at the drowned anchor respected the rules. Some saw them as outdated superstitions, the nervous scribbling of people who'd let their imaginations run wild during long, lonely shifts. Those bartenders never lasted long, and their departures were rarely clean. I learned this from the journal entries that grew increasingly frantic toward their ends, from the crossed-out names on the staff roster Vera kept in her office, and from the stories Thomas told me during the quiet hours when even the ghosts seemed to be resting. "There was a girl named Rebecca," Thomas said one night, his whiskey untouched as always. "Smart kid, psychology major at the university. She thought she could rationalize everything, explain away the rules with science and logic. Lasted 2 weeks." He paused, staring into his glass as if watching memories play out in the amber liquid. "She decided the mirror was just dirty, that the strange reflections were caused by age and imperfections in the mercury glass. So one night, right after midnight, she got a bottle of Windex and a cloth and started cleaning it. I felt a chill run through me despite the warm summer air." "What happened?" "The mirror got cleaner," Thomas said softly. "Crystal clear, in fact. So clear she could see everything it reflected, including the things that were always there, but the dirty glass had been hiding. She saw the faces pressed against the other side, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all the drowned souls who got trapped in there somehow, caught between the world of the living and wherever they were supposed to go. And once the mirror was clean, once there was nothing obscuring the view, they could see her too. Really see her." He took a sip of his whiskey then, the first time I'd ever seen him actually drink it. "She started screaming, wouldn't stop, kept saying they were calling her name, telling her to come through, to join them in the glass. She grabbed a bar stool and smashed the mirror, which made everything so much worse. All those souls, suddenly released, pouring out into the bar like water from a broken dam. The next morning, she was found curled up in the corner, catatonic, her hands bloody from trying to claw her way into the wall. Said she had to hide, had to get away from the wet hands trying to pull her down. What happened to her? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. State hospital, last I heard. She draws pictures, same thing over and over. Faces in water, faces in glass. Always drowning, always watching. He gestured toward the mirror behind me, which had been replaced, but somehow looked identical to every photograph I'd seen of the original. Took them 3 days to round up all the souls she'd released. Some of them didn't want to go back. Some of them tried to follow the living home. It was a mess. I turned to look at the mirror, careful not to stare too long. My reflection gazed back at me with that slight delay, and beyond my shoulder, I could see shadows moving that didn't match anything in the bar. The glass was dusty, spotted, imperfect, and I understood now that this wasn't neglect. It was mercy. But Rebecca wasn't the only one whose curiosity had cost them dearly. Thomas told me about David, a bartender who'd worked there in the early 2000s. David had become obsessed with Table 3, convinced that if he could just see who was drinking the water, he could help them move on, free them for whatever kept them bound to this place. He was a good kid, Thomas said, heart in the right place. But some things are meant to remain unseen. Some boundaries exist for everyone's protection, the living and the dead alike. David had set up his phone to record Table 3 one night, hiding on a nearby shelf with a clear view of the corner. He'd left the water and bread as required, but he watched the recording the next morning. According to Thomas, who'd heard it from Vera, who'd heard it from David himself in his final coherent moments, the footage showed something sitting at that table that the human mind wasn't meant to process. He described it as geometry that didn't work, Thomas explained. Angles that bend in directions that don't exist. A shape that was somehow both human and not, sitting there drinking water through a mouth that opened into darkness. He said watching it felt like his brain was trying to fold in on itself, like his thoughts were being pulled out of his head and rearranged into patterns that made him want to scream. David had lasted another 2 days before walking into the Gulf of Mexico at dawn and not coming back. They found his phone on the beach, the video deleted, replaced with just a single frame. A corner of the bar, empty except for a glass of water, and a message scratched into the table surface that hadn't been there before. Some thirsts cannot be quenched. Some hungers cannot be satisfied. Do not look. Do not question. Only serve. These stories terrified me, but they also reinforced why the rules existed. They weren't arbitrary restrictions. They were hard-won wisdom, each one purchased with someone's sanity or life. Following them wasn't about blind obedience. It was about survival. But I came dangerously close to learning this lesson myself during my 3rd month at the Drowned Anchor. It was a Saturday night, busier than usual, and I was juggling multiple drink orders when I noticed Table 3's glass was empty. In my rush, I made a critical mistake. I refilled it, set down the bread, but I forgot the most important part. I looked directly at the table. What I saw froze me in place. The figure sitting there was both present and absent, flickering like a failing light bulb. It was a man, or had been once, wearing clothes that were little more than rotted rags. His skin had the gray-green tinge of something that had been underwater far too long, and his eyes were hollow sockets filled with darkness that somehow still managed to convey desperate hunger. His mouth opened, wider than any mouth should open, revealing not teeth but an endless void. Time seemed to slow. I could feel my mind starting to crack at the edges, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what should be possible. The figure's hand reached toward me, fingers elongated and dripping, and I understood in that moment that if those fingers touched me, I would join him in whatever hell he inhabited, forever thirsty, forever hungry, forever trapped at Table 3. Jordan, Thomas's voice cut through the fog filling my mind. Look away. Now. I tore my gaze away with physical effort, as if breaking free from adhesive. The moment I did, I heard a sound like water draining, and when I risked a glance back, the figure was gone. But my hand was shaking so badly, I had to grip the bar to stay upright. Thomas appeared beside me, his face more substantial than I'd ever seen it, almost solid. You broke the rule. You looked directly at him. Do you understand how close you came to joining him? Who is he? I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. We don't know. He's been there since before the bar existed. Some think he was one of the first to drown when this island was still barely more than a sandbar. Died of thirst, even though he was surrounded by water. The salt water that can't quench thirst, only make it worse. Now he exists in a state of eternal need, and anyone who looks directly at him risks being pulled into that state with him. I understood then why the rule was so specific. It wasn't about ignoring him or pretending he didn't exist. It was about protecting ourselves from the contagion of his suffering. Some forms of torment were transmissible. Some forms of death were hungry for company. That night, after closing, I added my own notation to the journal beside Rule 18. I looked. Don't make my mistake. The thirst in his eyes is bottomless, and it wants to swallow you whole. No matter how much compassion you feel, no matter how much you want to help, keep your eyes down. This is the only mercy you can offer him. The experience changed how I understood my role at the Drowned Anchor. I wasn't just a bartender serving drinks. I was a gatekeeper, maintaining the delicate balance between the living and the dead. The rules weren't restrictions on my freedom. They were tools for survival, boundaries that protected everyone who entered this space. But the most terrifying thing I learned wasn't about breaking the rules. It was about the nights when the rules didn't matter, when things happened that no amount of preparation or protocol could prevent. The nights when Galveston's dark heart beat a little stronger, and the dead remembered they once had power. It was a Thursday in October when I experienced my first true encounter with the island's deeper mysteries. The night had been normal, relatively speaking, filled with the usual mix of living customers and spectral regulars. But around 1:30 in the morning, the air in the bar changed. It became heavy, oppressive, charged with electricity that made my hair stand on end. Every spirit in the bar manifested at once. The woman in the blue dress appeared at the end of the bar. Thomas became fully visible, solid, real. The figure at table 3 cast an actual shadow. Even spirits I'd never seen before materialized from the walls and floors. Dozens of them, all turning to face the door with expressions of fear and recognition. He's coming, Thomas said, and for the first time since I'd known him, his voice carried genuine emotion. Terror, the captain. He walks the island when the anniversary approaches. The night the storm took everything. The door opened, though I'd locked it hours ago. A man walked in, dripping wet despite the clear night outside, dressed in a captain's uniform that was both immaculate and ruined. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and his presence filled the entire bar with the smell of salt water and death. He looked at me, and in his gaze, I saw the great storm of 1900. I saw waves as tall as buildings crashing over the island. I saw thousands of people drowning, their screams lost in the howling wind. I saw a man who tried to save his city and failed, who'd gone down with his ship and carried that failure into death. Rum, he said, his voice like thunder across water. The last drink from a bottle. I've earned it. Every rule I'd learned screamed to me not to serve him. It was after 2 in the morning. The last drink from a bottle of rum belonged to the sea. But this was the sea, standing in front of me in the form of a dead captain, and I understood that some rules had exceptions, and some encounters transcended protocol. I poured the last of the rum into a glass and slid it across the bar. Captain Thaddeus Crane lifted it to his lips, and as he drank, I saw tears cutting tracks through the salt water on his face. She still waits for me, he whispered, looking at the woman in the blue dress. After all these years, she still waits. I know, I said softly. She comes here. I serve her the drink. She remembers you." He finished the rum and set down the glass. "Thank you, bartender, for honoring what was lost, for remembering what the storm tried to wash away. This bar stands as a monument to all of us who never made it home." Then he was gone, and with him, all the spirits faded back into their usual states of half-presence. Thomas returned to his translucent form. The woman in blue dissolved in a mist, and table 3 stood empty once again. But the bar felt different somehow, as if we'd passed through a moment of significance, a recognition that this place served a purpose beyond simply selling drinks. I added no notation to the journal about that night. Some encounters were too profound for words, too sacred to reduce to rules and regulations. Instead, I simply continued my shift, serving the dead and the living with equal care, understanding finally that in Galveston, on this thin strip of sand between land and sea, between past and present, between life and death, I was exactly where I needed to be. The regulars of the Drowned Anchor fell into 2 categories: those who knew what they were walking into, and those who stumbled in by accident and usually never returned. The ones who stayed, who came back night after night, were a collection of the most unusual individuals I'd ever encountered. They weren't just eccentric. They were touched by the same strangeness that permeated the bar itself, drawn to this place like moths to a flame that wouldn't burn them, but might reveal truths they weren't ready to face. There was Elena, a woman in her 60s who arrived every Tuesday and Friday at exactly 11:45. She always sat at the bar, always ordered a Manhattan, and always brought a photograph that she propped against a napkin holder. The photo showed a young man in a Navy uniform, handsome and smiling, frozen in a moment of youth that had long since passed. "My son," she told me one night when I had worked up the courage to ask. He was stationed in Galveston in 1995, went out one night after a shift and never came back. They found his car by the seawall, doors open, keys still in the ignition. No explanation, just gone. She took a sip of her Manhattan, her eyes never leaving the photograph. I come here because sometimes, late at night, I can feel him, like he's standing just behind me, trying to tell me something. The veil is thinner here. Whatever separates the living from the lost, it's weaker in this building. Maybe one night he'll be able to push through far enough to tell me what happened. Maybe one night I'll understand. I'd learned not to dismiss such claims. I'd seen too much to doubt that Elena might be right. On several occasions, I'd noticed a cold spot that seemed to hover near her stool, and once I'd caught a reflection in the mirror of someone standing behind her, a young man in a Navy uniform who faded when I tried to look directly at him. Then there was Marcus, a man who looked homeless but always had exact change for his drinks. He came in around 3 in the morning, ordered black coffee, and spent hours writing in a battered notebook. His hands shook constantly, and his eyes had the haunted look of someone who'd seen combat, though he claimed he'd never been in the military. I drowned in 1983, he told me matter-of-factly one night. Went swimming drunk off the pier, got pulled under by a riptide, technically died on the beach while the paramedics were working on me. Saw the tunnel of light, the whole cliché, but they brought me back. He tapped his pen against the notebook, leaving small ink marks on the page. Problem is, I don't think all of me came back. Or maybe something else came back with me. Ever since then, I can see them. All the dead people still walking around. The woman in the blue dress who comes in here. I saw her on the street corner last week, soaking wet, staring at the ocean. The old man who sits in the corner with the whiskey. I've seen him at the Strand, looking in shop windows like he's trying to remember what it was to want things. Marcus gestured around the bar with his pen. This place is lousy with them. More dead than living most nights. But here's the thing, they're not scary. They're just lost, stuck, going through motions they can't break free from. And nobody else can see them, which means nobody else can help them. So I write down their stories, document them. Maybe someday someone will read this and understand that death isn't always an ending. Sometimes it's just another kind of existence. I'd seen his notebook once when he'd gone to the bathroom. The pages were filled with descriptions of spirits, detailed accounts of their appearances, their behaviors, their patterns. Names, dates, causes of death where he could determine them. He was creating an archive of Galveston's restless dead, a catalog of souls who refused to leave. But perhaps the strangest regular was a woman who called herself Lydia, though I suspected that wasn't her real name. She appeared irregularly, sometimes twice a week, sometimes not for months. When she came, it was always alone, always late, and she always ordered 2 drinks, a glass of white wine for herself, and a whiskey sour that she placed on the bar beside her, but never touched. "It's for my sister," she explained the first time I questioned the second drink. "She died 7 years ago. Car accident. She was driving. I was in the passenger seat. I walked away without a scratch. She didn't walk away at all." Lydia stared at the untouched whiskey sour with an expression of profound grief. "The guilt is worse than any physical injury. I survived and she didn't, and there's no logic to it. No justice, no reason. So I buy her favorite drink, and I bring it places she would have loved. Museums, concerts, bars. I tell her about my life, what she's missing, what I wish I could share with her. And sometimes, in places like this, I swear I can feel her listening." What made Lydia's ritual particularly affecting was what happened to that second drink. I watched it carefully over the weeks, and I noticed that it always diminished. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly throughout the evening, the liquid level would lower, as if someone was taking small, delicate sips. The ice never melted. The condensation never ran down the glass. But by the time Lydia left, that whiskey sour was always at least half empty. I never mentioned this to her. Some forms of comfort are too fragile to examine too closely. These regulars formed a strange kind of family, bound together by their shared recognition that the drowned anchor was different. They acknowledged the spirits that most people couldn't see. They respected the rules that others would mock. And they looked out for each other with a fierce protectiveness that came from understanding what it meant to exist on the margins of normal reality. There were others too. The college professor who came in to grade papers and claimed the ambient presence of the dead helped him focus on what truly mattered. The night nurse who stopped by after a shift at the hospital, seeking a place where death wasn't something to fight, but something to coexist with peacefully. The artist who sketched the spirits she could see, creating haunting portraits of Galveston's forgotten dead. But not every customer understood what they were walking into. Those are the ones I worried about, the tourists or curious locals who'd heard rumors about the weird bar on the side street and wanted to experience something spooky. They came looking for entertainment, for a good story to tell their friends, never realizing they were stepping into something genuinely dangerous. I remember a group of fraternity boys who came in one Saturday night, loud and drunk, laughing about the haunted bar they'd heard about. They demanded I tell them ghost stories, pointed at the mirror, and made jokes about seeing dead people, and generally treated the entire place like an amusement park attraction. Thomas tried to warn them. "This isn't a place for games," he said from his corner, his voice carrying unexpected authority. "Show some respect." They laughed at him, called him a method actor hired to create atmosphere. One of them, drunker than the rest, grabbed a glass of water from table 3 and drank it as a dare, ignoring my shouts to stop. The change was instantaneous. His face went pale, and he began clawing at his throat, making strangled, choking sounds. But nothing was blocking his airway. He was simply experiencing the thirst of the thing that haunted table 3, that bottomless, unquenchable need for water that could never be satisfied. His friends tried to help him, pouring water down his throat, but he couldn't swallow. The water just ran out of his mouth, and still he gasped and clutched at his throat, experiencing dehydration that transcended the physical. I grabbed the journal, frantically searching for any rule about this situation, any guidance on how to fix what had been broken. Finally, I found a small notation in faded ink. If the water is taken by the unworthy, refill the glass immediately and pour salt in a circle around table 3. The thirst will be redirected back to its source. I did exactly as instructed, moving faster than I'd ever moved, my hand steady despite my terror. The moment I completed the circle of salt, the fraternity boy gasped and fell to his knees, coughing and retching. The thirst had released him, returned to its eternal presence at table 3, appeased by the ritual of the salt. His friends carried him out without a word. Their earlier bravado completely evaporated. I never saw them again, but I heard later that the boy who'd drunk the water developed a pathological fear of thirst, drinking water constantly, obsessively, never quite able to shake the memory of that infinite need. That incident reinforced a crucial truth about the drowned anchor. This wasn't a place for thrill seekers or skeptics. It was a sanctuary for those who understood the weight of death, the persistence of memory, and the importance of maintaining boundaries between worlds. The regulars knew this instinctively. They'd all experienced loss, grief, or trauma that had opened their eyes to the reality that existence was stranger and more layered than most people ever realized. On quieter nights, when the bar held only the regulars and the spirits they come to know, there was a strange peace to the place. Elena would sit with her Manhattan and her photograph, perhaps feeling her son's presence hovering near. Marcus would write in his notebook, documenting the dead with the dedication of a historian. Lydia would share a drink with her sister's memory, carrying her grief with dignity. And Thomas would nurse his eternal whiskey, watching over all of them with the patient care of someone who'd long ago accepted his role as guardian. "You're part of it now," Thomas told me one night as I was wiping down the bar. "Part of the family. The ones who see clearly. The ones who understand that Galveston isn't just a city, it's a repository of memory. A place where the past refuses to let go, and the present has learned to accommodate it." He was right. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being just an employee of the drowned anchor and had become something more. A keeper of secrets, a server of the dead, a member of a community that existed in the spaces between heartbeats, in the moments when the veil grew thin and the impossible became routine. The regulars weren't just customers. They were fellow travelers on a strange journey, people who'd learned that reality was vast and complicated, that death was neither ending nor escape, but simply another state of being. And the drowned anchor was our meeting place, our neutral ground, where the living and the dead could share space without fear or judgment. As I locked up each morning, watching the sunrise paint the Gulf in shades of pink and gold, I understood why people kept coming back. In a world that insisted on simple answers and clear boundaries, this bar offered something different: acknowledgement of complexity, acceptance of mystery, and the comfort of knowing you weren't alone in seeing beyond the veil. The regulars of the drowned anchor were peculiar, certainly, but they were also the sanest people I'd ever met, because they'd stopped pretending that the world made sense and had learned instead to navigate its beautiful, terrifying strangeness with grace. 6 months into working at the drowned anchor, I finally understood what Vera had meant during my interview. This job wasn't about mixing drinks or managing inventory. It was about maintaining equilibrium in a place where the normal rules of reality bent and sometimes broke entirely. Every shift was a negotiation between the living and the dead, between the world as it should be and the world as it actually was. I developed rituals of my own, small practices that helped me survive the weight of what I encountered nightly. Before each shift, I would stand outside the bar for 5 minutes, breathing in the salt air from the Gulf, reminding myself that I was alive, solid, real. I would check the journal, reviewing the rules that had been written by those who came before me, drawing strength from their experiences. And I would say a small prayer, not to any particular god, but to the island itself, asking for the wisdom to serve both the living and the dead with equal compassion. The job had changed me in ways I was still discovering. I saw the world differently now, noticed the spaces between things, the moments when reality seemed to flicker like a bad connection. I'd become sensitive to presences, able to feel when spirits were near, even when I couldn't see them. My dreams were haunted by the faces I'd seen in the mirror, the desperate thirst in Table 3's occupant, the grief in the woman in blue's eyes. But I'd also found a strange kind of peace. There was purpose in what I did, meaning that transcended simply earning a paycheck. I was part of something larger than myself, a tradition that stretched back over a century, maintained by bartenders who'd understood that some places existed to serve needs beyond the physical. The other bartenders who worked at the Drowned Anchor became my anchors to sanity. There was Rivera, who worked weekend days and had been there for 15 years. She taught me tricks for managing the more aggressive spirits, how to firmly but respectfully establish boundaries when the dead became too demanding. "You're the living one," she reminded me. "You have authority here, but only if you claim it with respect. Never with fear, never with anger. Just calm assertion of your space." There was Cole, who covered my nights off, a former Marine who'd seen combat in Iraq and claimed that dealing with ghosts was easier than dealing with the horrors living humans could inflict on each other. "At least the dead here aren't trying to hurt anyone," he said. "They're just stuck, lost. I can work with that." And there was Amara, the newest hire besides myself, a woman in her 30s who'd moved to Galveston specifically because she could see spirits and wanted to be somewhere that acknowledged their existence. I spent my whole life being told I was crazy. She confided one night when we overlapped shifts. Doctors, therapists, family, everyone insisted I was hallucinating. Then I found this place, and suddenly everything made sense. I'm not crazy. The world is just bigger than most people can see. We supported each other through the difficult nights, shared stories about our strangest encounters, and developed a dark sense of humor that helped us process the impossible things we witnessed. When Amara served the woman in blue for the first time and broke down crying afterward, overwhelmed by the weight of that eternal grief, we sat with her until sunrise, drinking coffee and sharing our own first encounters until she felt steady again. The living regulars became friends, confidants who understood what we dealt with because they saw it too. Elena brought me home-cooked meals, concerned that I wasn't eating properly while working nights. Marcus shared passages from his notebook, trusting me with the stories of the dead he'd cataloged. Lydia invited me to her sister's memorial service, 7 years after the accident, because she wanted someone there who understood why she still bought that second drink. But surviving the Galveston night shift wasn't just about finding support. It was about developing a mindset, a way of being that could accommodate the constant presence of death without becoming consumed by it. I had to learn to hold space for grief without taking it into myself, to witness suffering without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, to serve the dead without joining them. There were nights when I wanted to quit, when the weight of it all felt unbearable. The night I served 3 different spirits who'd all died in car accidents, each one reliving their final moments, trapped in loops of trauma they couldn't escape. The night a living customer had a heart attack at the bar, and I performed CPR while surrounded by the dead, who watched with expressions of recognition and sympathy, remembering their own transitions. The night I found a suicide note tucked under Table 3, written by someone who'd apparently decided the bar was the last place they wanted to visit before ending their life. That last one nearly broke me. I called Vera in tears, asking how I was supposed to keep doing this, how anyone could maintain their sanity while surrounded by so much death and suffering. She came to the bar immediately, found me sitting on the floor behind the counter, and simply sat beside me in silence for a long time. "You're carrying their weight," she finally said. "That's the mistake everyone makes at first. You think you're supposed to solve their problems, release them, help them move on. But that's not your job. Jordan. Your job is to acknowledge them, to see them, to serve them with dignity and respect. What they do with that acknowledgement is their choice, not your responsibility. She put her hand on my shoulder, and I felt the steadiness in her touch, the strength of someone who'd been doing this far longer than I had. The dead don't need you to fix them. They need you to remember them, to treat them like they still matter. That's all any of us really want, living or dead. To matter, to be seen, to not be forgotten. Her words shifted something fundamental in how I approached the work. I stopped trying to help in ways that weren't mine to offer. I focused instead on the simple acts, pouring the drinks, placing the water, speaking the ritual words, maintaining the rules that kept everyone safe. I became a witness rather than a savior, and in doing so, I found a sustainable way to exist in this strange space between worlds. The physical toll of night shift work was real. My sleep schedule was permanently altered, my social life limited to others who kept strange hours, my health requiring constant monitoring. I took vitamin D supplements to compensate for the lack of sunlight. I maintained strict sleep hygiene, blackout curtains, and white noise machines, creating artificial night during the day. I forced myself to exercise, to eat real meals, to spend time in nature when I wasn't working, remembering what it meant to be fully alive. But the psychological toll was more complex. I found myself viewing death differently than most people my age. Where my former co-workers from the restaurant feared mortality, I'd seen that death wasn't always an ending. Where others dismissed ghost stories as fiction, I knew with absolute certainty that consciousness could persist beyond physical death. This knowledge was both comforting and disturbing, a weight I carried that set me apart from nearly everyone outside the Drowned Anchor's walls. I started keeping my own journal, not in the leather book behind the bar, but a private notebook where I processed what I experienced. I wrote about the spirits I'd served, the living customers who touched my heart, the moments when the veil between worlds seemed paper thin. I wrote about my fears, my questions, my growing understanding that reality was far stranger than I had ever imagined. One entry, written after a particularly difficult shift, captured the essence of what I'd learned. Tonight, I served a man who'd been dead for 90 years. He ordered the same drink he'd ordered on the night he drowned, and for just a moment, he smiled like he was remembering being alive. I think that's what this job really is. Creating moments where the dead can remember they once lived, and the living can remember they won't live forever. Both sides need that reminder. Both sides need this space where the truth of mortality can be faced without fear. As my first year at the Drowned Anchor approached, I realized I'd become something I never expected, a bridge between worlds. I was neither fully part of the living world, with its willful blindness to death, nor part of the dead's realm of memory and persistence. I existed in between, serving both, belonging fully to neither. The rules that had seemed so bizarre during my interview now felt like close friends, familiar rhythms that structure my nights. I knew without consulting the journal when to place the water, when to pour the rum into the sink, when to avoid the mirror, and when it was safe to glance at my reflection. These practices had become muscle memory, automatic responses that kept me safe while allowing me to do the work. But more than the rules, I developed instincts. I could sense when a spirit was about to manifest before they appeared. I could tell the difference between a living customer who could see the dead and one who was blissfully unaware. I knew when the bar's atmosphere was shifting, when something significant was about to occur, when to be extra vigilant and when to relax into the routine. Vera visited less frequently now, trusting that I'd found my footing. But when she did come by, there was approval in her eyes, a recognition that I'd joined the small fraternity of bartenders who not only survived the Drowned Anchor, but had embraced its strange purpose. "You're ready," she told me one night, sliding a key across the bar. "This opens a cabinet in my office." Inside, You'll find journals dating back to 1885. Every bartender who's worked here who understood what this place really is. Add yours when you're ready. Your experiences, your insights, your own rules if you discover any. You're part of the lineage now. I took the key with trembling hands, understanding the weight of what she was offering. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a keeper of Galveston's hidden history, a guardian of a space where the dead came to be remembered. The sun was rising over the Gulf as I locked up that morning, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible in their beauty. The street was empty, the tourists still asleep in their hotels, unaware of the night's activities. The drowned anchor looked like any other historic building in the early morning light, its secrets invisible to casual observers. But I knew the truth. Behind that locked door, in the shadows that never quite disappeared, the dead were settling into their daytime rest. The woman in blue would fade until sunset. Thomas would become nearly invisible. Table 3 would sit empty, its occupant retreating into whatever space existed between here and nowhere. They would wait, patient as only the dead could be, for night to return and for me to unlock the door once more. I walked home through streets that were beginning to stir with morning activity, joggers and early risers starting their days while I was ending mine. I felt the disconnection that came with night shift work, moving counter to the world's rhythm. But I also felt purpose, knowing that when darkness fell again, I would return to my post at the crossroads between life and death, serving both with equal care. Surviving the Galveston night shift wasn't about being fearless. It was about acknowledging the fear and working anyway. It wasn't about understanding everything. It was about accepting mystery as a permanent condition. It wasn't about fixing the dead or saving the lost. It was about creating a space where everyone, living and dead, could exist without judgment, where grief could be honored and memory preserved. The drowned anchor would be there long after I was gone. I understood that now. Other bartenders would come, learn the rules, serve the spirits, and eventually move on or become spirits themselves. The bar existed outside normal time, a constant in Galveston's ever-changing landscape, anchored by the dead who refused to leave and the living who chose to stay. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, exhausted but satisfied, I thought about the suicide note I'd found under table 3. The police had identified the writer, a young man who'd been reported missing. They found him 3 days later, alive, checked into a hospital where he was receiving help. He'd left the note at the bar, then apparently changed his mind. I like to think that sitting at the drowned anchor, surrounded by the dead who persisted despite everything, had shown him something important. That existence, even painful existence, had value. That being remembered mattered. That there was always tomorrow night, another shift, another chance. That's what I'd learned in my months behind that bar. Life was strange and death was stranger, but both were worth showing up for. Both deserved to be served with dignity, respect, and the willingness to maintain the boundaries that kept everyone safe. I set my alarm for late afternoon and fell into bed, knowing I would dream of mirrors and water glasses, of blue dresses and eternal thirst. But I would wake up, and when night fell, I would return to the drowned anchor, unlock the door, and begin again. Because that's what it meant to survive the Galveston night shift. Not just enduring, but embracing the role of witness, guardian, and server to the strange and wonderful souls who found their way to that bar. The living who needed to see beyond the veil, and the dead who needed to be seen. In the end, we were all just trying to matter, to be remembered, to know that our existence, however brief or prolonged, had meaning. And in a bar on a side street in Galveston, where the rules were bizarre and the clientele even more so, I'd found my purpose in helping both the living and the dead achieve exactly that. The job was impossible, exhausting, sometimes terrifying, but it was mine, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Because in that space between life and death, in that bar where time moved differently and reality bent, I discovered the most important truth of all. We're all just passing through, living or dead, and the greatest gift we can offer each other is simply to bear witness to that passage with compassion and respect. That was the real secret to surviving the Galveston night shift. Not the rules, though they helped. Not the rituals, though they provided structure. But the understanding that in serving others, living and dead, we serve something larger than ourselves. We maintained a space where existence in all its strange forms could be honored, where memory could persist, and where the boundaries between worlds could be acknowledged without fear. As I drifted off to sleep, I heard the distant sound of waves crashing against the seawall, the eternal rhythm of the Gulf that had witnessed everything Galveston had endured. The living city above, the dead city below, and people like me caught in between, doing our best to honor both. Tomorrow night, I would do it all again. And the night after that, and the night after that. For as long as I was able, for as long as I was needed, I would stand behind that bar and serve whoever walked through the door, offering them drinks, dignity, and the knowledge that they were seen. That was enough. That was everything. That was what it meant to work the night shift at the Drown Anchor in Galveston, Texas, where the rules were bizarre, the clientele was stranger, and every night offered a glimpse into the beautiful, terrifying mystery of existence itself. The end.